In 1646, the Westminster Assembly produced the defining doctrinal standard for the Presbyterian and Reformed tradition. Forged during the English Civil War, the Confession was the product of a political covenant between England and Scotland to standardize doctrine across their respective kingdoms. The document's theological architecture was so robust that the 1689 London Baptist Confession adopted its soteriology almost word for word. But a close reading of Chapter 10 reveals a mechanical formulation regarding effectual calling. The text states that God calls the elect by His Word and Spirit. This phrasing establishes the mediate model. It presents the internal work of the Holy Spirit and the external instrument of the preached gospel operating simultaneously as a joint action to impart spiritual life. Both confessions affirm the 5 points of Calvinism, yet grouping the Word and the Spirit into a single operation masks a mechanical tension regarding how sovereign grace is applied. This confessional formulation contains a precision deficit. By failing to separate the Spirit's action from the gospel's delivery, the sequence of monergistic salvation remains open to synergistic interpretations. The most rigorous correction to this ambiguity came from the High Calvinist theologian John Gill, a thinker whose logical deductions outran his own confessional inheritance. Gill did not dispute monergism. His critique was an intra-Calvinist debate, focused strictly on the logical sequence of how a spiritually dead soul is awakened. He posed a structural question: does regeneration occur mediately, using the gospel as an instrument, or immediately, directly by the Holy Spirit alone? Gill argued that treating the Spirit's creative act and the Word's instrumental delivery as one event creates an internal logical contradiction. He proposed an immediate model that splits the operation into 2 distinct sequential nodes. The first node is regeneration. Gill defined this as the immediate, sovereign impartation of spiritual life by the Holy Spirit, occurring entirely independent of the gospel. The second node is effectual calling. Only after life is imparted does God use the gospel as an external instrument to call that now living soul into conscious faith. To determine which architecture is correct, we must subject both models to the logic of total depravity and the biological mechanics of life itself. In the framework of Reformed anthropology, the unregenerate human is considered completely spiritually dead, possessing zero receptivity to any divine things. This exposes a structural conflict in the Westminster mediate model. If the gospel functions as the instrument of regeneration, the dead receiver must possess a capacity to process it. The logic is simple. An instrument meant to produce life cannot require the very capacity it is supposed to create. A corpse cannot hear. Regeneration must therefore mirror the original Genesis creation, a creatio ex nihilo, which bypasses the need for an external instrument. The divine fiat imparts existence natively. God creates the necessary hardware within the system before it can process any external software. We see this in the resurrection of Lazarus. Christ's command did not find a living recipient. The command created one. Lazarus heard because he was raised. He was not raised because he heard. Making the external gospel a required instrument for the initial spark of life introduces a condition. It forces the Spirit's sovereign act to depend on a secondary cause, which challenges the unconditionality of sovereign grace. The primary defense of the Westminster model rests on texts like James 1:18 and 1 Peter 1:23, which speak of being begotten, or born again, by the word of truth. Resolving this requires distinguishing between the physical and temporal difference of conception versus birth. Regeneration maps to conception. It is the secret, immediate impartation of life where none existed prior. Theologically, this is the habitus, the underlying root disposition implanted by the Spirit alone. Effectual calling maps to birth. Birth does not create life. It brings forth life that has already been conceived into the world. This is the actus, the conscious exercise of faith. It is triggered when the newly implanted habitus is excited by the external instrument of the gospel. The Greek text confirms this sequence. In James 1:18, the verb apokueo means parturition, to deliver or bring forth. It does not mean to conceive. Westminster read a delivery text as a conception text. The gospel does not create life out of the void. It is the appointed delivery mechanism bringing forth the life the Spirit has secretly conceived. The vision of the Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel 37 provides a canonical test for this two-stage model. In the initial stage, the Spirit unilaterally reconstitutes the physical structures of the bodies before any breath enters them. This aligns with Ezekiel 36, where God directly gives a new heart of flesh, without first proclaiming a word to the stone heart. In the subsequent stage, breath finally enters the reconstituted bodies, as Ezekiel prophesies the word. Ezekiel's external prophesying is the appointed occasion, but the Spirit's immediate action is the efficient cause of life. This biblical dramatization mirrors Gill's split-node architecture: impartation of life first, hearing the word second. The Holy Spirit's own inspired account distinguishes the impartation of life from the hearing of the word, presenting a two-stage sequence that the single-node Westminster framework does not explicitly account for. Because Gill challenges Westminster, it is often assumed his sequence pits him against the mainstream Reformed tradition. The historical record shows otherwise. The canons of Dort are the product of an international assembly called specifically to resolve the mechanics of sovereign grace. Unlike the Westminster Assembly, Dort's third and fourth heads of doctrine address regeneration with exact mechanical specificity. Article 12 explicitly declares that regeneration is a resurrection from the dead, wrought without our aid. It states this work is in no wise affected merely by the external preaching of the gospel. Dort divorces the external preaching of the gospel from the efficient cause of regeneration, describing the Spirit pervading the inmost recesses of the man immediately. While Westminster conflates the Word and the Spirit, Dort structurally matches Gill's dual-track timeline. Gill's position is a precise articulation of what the tradition's most rigorous historical document actually says. A theological anxiety remains. If the gospel is removed from the act of regeneration, is the importance of preaching diminished? Gill's framework honors the gospel by placing it exactly where it belongs, as the external exciter of the internal actus. The newly implanted disposition requires propositional truth to latch onto. A regenerate mind needs to know who Christ is to exercise conscious faith. The gospel does not create what is absent. It calls forth and organizes what the Spirit has already placed in the dark. Relying on incomplete statements like Westminster 10.1 allows synergistic concepts to creep into the foundational moments of salvation. The sequence remains. The Spirit regenerates the elect immediately and sovereignly, and only then does the Word call the living soul to conscious faith. In the architecture of sovereign grace, logical precision is a requirement. God's creative fiat operates without conditions, without instruments, and without our aid.